Have you ever stopped to wonder what hidden truths rest beneath the cold stone floors of ancient cathedrals? What really happens to royalty when it's not war or betrayal, but time itself that claims the crown? This is the haunting, captivating story of Queen Elizabeth I, not the legend in life, but the mystery in death. Elizabeth Tudor, forever etched in history as Queen Elizabeth I, was more than a monarch. She was the heartbeat of an era. Her name stirred fierce loyalty, quiet fear, deep admiration, and at times bitter resentment. She was Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the last great Tudor. For 44 extraordinary years, she ruled not just a nation, but the soul of an age. Through rebellion, war, religious turmoil, and some of the greatest threats Europe could muster, England endured, and at the helm stood one woman. Queen Elizabeth I defied the seemingly invincible Philip II of Spain, shattered the might of the Spanish Armada, and guided a fractured nation from the brink of civil unrest into a dazzling era of discovery, culture, and rising empire. But even Gloriana, with all her strength, intellect, and glory, could not conquer her most intimate and persistent fear. What would become of her body after death? Behind the powdered face and layers of regal splendor was not just a queen, but a woman profoundly troubled by the thought of her own mortality. For nearly half a century, Elizabeth wore the crown, but she also wore the weight of a truth she could never escape. Elizabeth lived every day in the shadow of danger, surrounded by death, whispers of betrayal, family plots, and the looming threat of foreign invasion. She knew better than anyone how quickly queens could fall, how blood ties could turn to blades. Her own cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, had once threatened her crown, a challenge that ended in execution. It was Elizabeth herself who signed the death warrant. And though she remained composed in the public eye, that decision weighed heavily on her soul until her dying breath. But there was one fear that eclipsed them all. Not treason, not war. Something far more personal. What would happen to her body once life left it? In the 16th century, death was not gentle. And for Elizabeth, the thought of what came after the final breath wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. In the 16th century, embalming was anything but gentle. It wasn't a sacred farewell. It was a brutal, mechanical process, cold and invasive. The human body, once full of life, was treated more like a broken vessel than something to be honored. Laid out on a stone slab, the still body met the edge of long, gleaming blades. The flesh was cut open, not with care, but with clinical precision. One by one, the organs, the heart, liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were removed by hand. To fight off the inevitable decay, the now empty body was packed tightly with potent herbs and rare spices, cloves, cinnamon, myrrh, fragrances that once symbolized royalty, now used to mask death. But these ingredients weren't added for grace or comfort. They weren't about honoring the person who had passed. They were simply tools, used to delay the rot, not to dignify the soul. There was no reverence in the rituals of embalming, no honor, no grace. The spices weren't for respect. They were simply a desperate attempt to mask the unbearable stench of decay that always came too soon. In her final hours, Queen Elizabeth I pleaded with those around her. She begged her physicians, her courtiers, her trusted attendants, Do not cut me. Do not open. She believed the body was sacred, a vessel meant to be returned to God whole. She wanted to meet her Maker as she had lived, untouched, unbroken, and defiantly herself. But death, like time, obeys no crown. On the 24th of March, 1603, Elizabeth I drew her last breath, and with that breath, the authority and protections of the monarchy fell away. The Queen was gone. What remained was only a body, and for that body, the choice was no longer hers. Bound by duty, tradition, and the cold demands of practicality, the physicians and surgeons did what they believed had to be done. Elizabeth's body was quietly moved to the embalming chamber, a place of cold stone, sharp tools, and silent resignation. There, her chest was opened. The very heart that had once carried the weight and hope of an entire kingdom was removed. One by one, her stomach, liver, and intestines were taken out. In their place, fragrant spices, myrrh, cloves, cinnamon, were packed tightly inside her hollow frame. Not out of reverence, not out of love, but out of necessity. This wasn't a sacred rite. It was damage control, a desperate measure to stop what nature would otherwise unleash. Without it, her body, swollen from decay, could rupture during her state funeral, turning a national farewell into a horrifying spectacle. The Queen had ruled with dignity, but in death, her body became a problem to manage. Inside her lifeless body, the natural buildup of gases threatened a grim outcome. If left unchecked, her coffin could have become a ticking time bomb. The danger wasn't imagined, it had happened before. History held dark memories of royal funerals gone wrong. Coffins splitting open mid-procession, revealing what should have remained hidden. Gruesome, the embalmer knew this could not happen to Elizabeth. Not to a queen who had ruled with such pride and command. Her final farewell had to be remembered for its grace, not its horror. Once the difficult work was done, Elizabeth's body was carefully wrapped in deep crimson velvet, rich and regal, embroidered with Tudor roses, emblems of a dynasty now drawing its last breath. Then she was placed within a heavy coffin, her chapter sealed in silence. Her coffin, lined with lead, was crafted not only for grandeur, but for control. It wasn't just meant to honor her status. It was meant to seal in what death would try to let out. When the lid was finally closed, the rituals began. England's last Tudor monarch was ready for her final voyage. Her royal barge drifted slowly down the Thames, gliding through gray waters beneath a sky heavy with sorrow. Along the riverbanks, thousands stood in silence. No one spoke, few moved. The grief hung thick in the air, shared by rich and poor alike. It was a solemn, hauntingly beautiful sight, one fit for a queen. But beneath the surface, something was off. Those closest to the barge began to whisper of an unsettling scent, something sweet yet wrong. A strange, cloying odor slipping through the lead-lined coffin. Even in death, Elizabeth could not fully escape the body she had once begged to protect. Even in death, Elizabeth's body spoke, quietly yet powerfully, of the human fragility beneath royal splendor. The gases of decay, unstoppable and unseen, crept through invisible seams in her sealed coffin, carried on the wind like a fading echo of her legacy. It was a chilling reminder. No crown, no title, no divine right, could hold back nature forever. Had the lead casing given way, had the pressure forced a crack, the result would have been unthinkable. England might have witnessed the gruesome eruption of its most iconic queen, her remains scattered before the very people who came to mourn her. But the coffin, by some mercy or craftsmanship, held firm, just enough. And so, Elizabeth was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, beneath the solemn grandeur of stone and silence. Her tomb was magnificent, designed to immortalize the legend, even as the woman herself had returned to dust. On the surface, her tomb appeared peaceful, majestic and still, promising eternal rest. But time has a way of disturbing even the most sacred of silences. Centuries later, in the late 1800s, during Queen Victoria's reign, that silence was broken. A man named Dean Arthur Stanley was granted rare permission to enter the sealed royal tombs beneath Westminster Abbey. The Victorians, ever fascinated by death and legacy, were deep in the throes of historical curiosity, digging, cataloging, remembering. With a flickering lantern in hand, Stanley descended into the cold, forgotten chambers where England's monarchs had slept undisturbed for generations. The air was thick, dense with the scent of dust, old stone, and the weight of centuries. Every footstep echoed with reverence. The walls, once alive with ceremony, now stood heavy and mute, keeping their secrets in the dark. And as Stanley moved deeper, he approached what no living soul had seen in over 200 years, the tomb of Gloriana herself. When Dean Stanley stepped into the chamber where Elizabeth once lay in majesty, he wasn't met with the splendor of a queen. He was met with the quiet ruin left by time. The coffin, once elegant and imposing, had caved in on itself. The wood had long since turned to dust, the rich crimson velvet faded and fragile, its threads barely clinging to memory. Even the lead, designed to outlast centuries, had buckled and warped under the slow, relentless force of decay from within. And yet, on the lid, now cracked and bowed, faint initials remained. E.R. Elizabeth Regina. They lingered like a ghost's whisper, the last fragile trace of the woman the world once knew as Gloriana. But that was not all. Above Elizabeth's shattered coffin, resting on a separate platform, were the remains of someone else, someone unexpected. Above Elizabeth lay the remains of her half-sister, Mary I. In life, their rivalry had torn England apart in flames and fear. One ruled in the name of Catholic tradition, the other in defiant Protestant reform. Blood had been spilled, loyalties divided. They were sisters by blood, but strangers by conviction. And yet in death, they were sealed together, crammed into the same narrow stone vault. Enemies once, now neighbors for eternity. The air in that chamber was thick, stagnant with the weight of centuries, the scent of old rot and unspoken memory. Dean Stanley stood there, alone, surrounded by two queens who had shaped a nation, and yet had become fragile remnants of bone, cloth, and decay. What he witnessed told a grim and humbling truth. Even the most powerful are not spared the slow, silent hunger of time. Elizabeth, embalmed in haste and fear, had not decayed peacefully. Her body bore the scars of an afterlife she never wanted. A queen in life, yes, but in death, just another soul claimed by the earth. Inside the ruined coffin, time had not been kind. The internal gases had continued their cruel, silent labor. The lead bulged unnaturally, as if the body still strained against its final prison. The once luxurious velvet was stained and stiff, the wood beneath it long since reduced to nothing. And yet, amid the wreckage, echoes of her identity clung stubbornly to the silence. The faded threads of Tudor roses, the crumbling embroidery, symbols of a legacy not easily erased. Above ground, the world had moved on. Tourists wandered the gleaming marble floors of Westminster Abbey, cameras in hand, admiring the grandeur, the history, the music echoing through the vaulted ceilings. They marveled at beauty. They walked among legends. But beneath those very stones, a different story rested in the dark. Not one of glory, but of ruin. Not a triumph, but a quiet unraveling. Where once stood a queen, now lay only a fragile trace of what power cannot preserve. The mortal truth we all return to. Her coffin, rotting, bloated, and heartbreakingly fragile, still cradles the remnants of a queen who once ruled empires, commanded fleets, and bent the world to her will. Elizabeth's tomb is not just a monument, it is a message, etched not in stone, but in time itself, a quiet truth that whispers through the centuries. Even the greatest must bow to the earth. Velvet will fade, lead will bend, and flesh, no matter how royal, cannot defy the laws of nature. Her legacy lives on, of course, in the pages of history books, in grand portraits, in the very idea of the Elizabethan age. She is studied, admired, debated. But the woman herself, the one once cloaked in gold and crowned with fire, now lies in stillness, in a tomb beneath the feet of strangers. Her glory devoured by time, her power gone. And yet, even in that silence, she remains. Shrouded in centuries of darkness, Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the strategist, the sovereign who defied empires and outmaneuvered kings, now rests in quiet ruin. Her body, once cloaked in majesty, lies in fragments. Because in the end, time is the only true monarch, and not even a queen can outlast its rule.